The great tranquility arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper that silenced the world. It was a Tuesday. In London, stockbrokers stopped shouting and simply processed transactions with serene efficiency. In the Congo, warring factions laid down their arms, not in surrender, but with a shared, placid understanding that the conflict was illogical. Across the globe, the constant, churning static of human ambition, rage, and despair smoothed into a placid hum. There were no ships in the sky, no alien declarations of conquest, only a profound and unsettling peace that settled over the 7 billion souls of Earth like a weighted blanket. Crime fell to zero. Global hunger was methodically eradicated within a year as nations pooled resources without political friction. The climate, once a problem of catastrophic proportions, was being steadily stabilized by a species that now worked in perfect, unselfish harmony. Humanity had achieved utopia, but Dr. Eris Thorne knew it had cost them their souls. From his hermetically sealed apartment, overlooking the surgically clean panorama of what was once Chicago, he watched the people move below. They flowed like data streams, their paths optimized for efficiency, their faces locked in expressions of mild, unshakable contentment. They never laughed loudly, never wept, never slammed a door in anger or kissed with desperate passion. They were perfect components in a flawless machine, and the sight of it made Eris's bones ache with a phantom grief for a world he was increasingly alone in remembering. His sanctuary, his secret rebellion, was 3 levels down, shielded by a triple-woven mesh of lead and bismuth and insulated from the all-pervasive psychic calm. He called it the echo chamber. It was a small circular room, its walls lined with humming servers that held his life's work, the last library of human noise. Eris was a mnemonist, a historian of feeling. Before the tranquility, his field had been an obscure academic pursuit, a fringe science dedicated to archiving the raw, subjective experience of history. Now, it was the only thing that kept him sane. He slid into the worn leather of the immersion chair, the cool metal of the neural interface pressing against his temples. The system whirred to life, bypassing the city's placid network and drawing power directly from a geothermal vent he had secretly tapped into. On the screen, a list of files appeared: terror, Omaha Beach, 1944, elation, Salk vaccine announcement, 1955, anguish, parent, Santiago, 1973. He needed something vibrant today, something to fight back the encroaching gray. He selected a file labeled simply Chaos, Mardi Gras, New Orleans, 2019. He closed his eyes and hit enter. The world dissolved. The sterile silence of his chamber was ripped away, replaced by a wall of sound and sensation. He was no longer Eris, the quiet academic. He was a young woman named Chloe, her senses overwhelmed by the riot of pre-tranquility life. The air was thick with the smell of beer, fried dough, and sweat. A brass band blared a joyous, discordant tune that vibrated through the soles of his feet. Cascade of purple and gold beads was thrown from a passing float, and he felt the sting as one caught him on the cheek, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated glee. People were shouting, singing, crushing against him on all sides. It wasn't efficient or orderly. It was a glorious, chaotic mess. He felt a stranger's hand grab his and pull him into a spontaneous dance. The sheer, explosive joy of the moment so potent it felt like a drug. It was pointless, illogical, and utterly, beautifully human. For 12 minutes, he lived in that memory. his mind awash in the feelings the world above had forgotten. When the simulation ended, the silence that crashed back in was more profound than ever. The sensory whiplash left him gasping, the ghost of Chloe's laughter still echoing in his mind. He sat in the darkness, sweat cooling on his skin, the contrast of physical pain. This was what they had lost. Not just war and crime, but the chaotic, beautiful friction that created art, that forged love, that gave life its jagged, terrifying, and worthwhile edge. The confluence, as the off-world telepathic presence was eventually named by the few who studied it, had offered peace, but its price was definition. Light cannot exist without shadow, and they had willingly, silently, traded both for a world of perpetual twilight. As he was preparing to ascend back to his apartment, a flashing red light on a diagnostic panel caught his eye. It was an alert from an external sensor he'd placed near the service conduits. A maintenance drone, one of the thousands that silently patrolled the city, had malfunctioned. Its movement logs, which should have been a model of fluid efficiency, showed a series of spastic, jittery tremors. It had frozen for 7 minutes directly outside the ventilation shaft for the echo chamber before rebooting and continuing on its placid way. Curiosity piqued. Eris accessed the drone's internal diagnostics. The error log was filled with flags he'd never seen before: recursive logic paradox, harmonic dissonance fault, uncategorized emotional spectrum anomaly. The drone's processor, designed to operate in the calm, predictable environment of the tranquility, had encountered something it couldn't compute. It was the residue, Eris realized, a faint psychic echo of the Mardi Gras simulation leaking through the vent. The sheer chaotic joy of that memory, even as a whisper, had been enough to momentarily break the machine's programming. His heart began to hammer against his ribs with an intensity he hadn't felt outside the immersion chair. The stillness, the psychic field the confluence used to maintain its gentle dominion, wasn't a perfect monolithic wall. It was a signal, and like any signal, it could be jammed. It could be disrupted by its antithesis: pure, unfiltered human noise. For the first time in 3 years, Eris felt a surge of something the confluence had worked so hard to erase. It was a dangerous, volatile, and intoxicating feeling. It was hope. He spent the next week modifying a piece of his archival equipment, a small, portable emitter designed for field recordings. He couldn't risk broadcasting a full sensory memory. The psychic backlash would be immense and instantly traceable. He needed something subtler, a proof of concept. He chose a recording from his personal collection, a memory from his own childhood, long before the stillness. It was a simple, 30-second loop, the sound of his younger sister, aged 5, falling into a fit of uncontrollable, gasping laughter after a poorly told joke, interwoven with his mother's gentle, exasperated sigh. It was a symphony of imperfection. With the device concealed in a false bottom of his satchel, he took the public transport tube to the city's central plaza. The space, once a bustling hub of commerce and culture, was now a monument to serene order. Citizens glided along designated pathways, their faces calm, their purpose clear. Eris found a bench near a kinetic sculpture that spun in slow, mathematically perfect patterns. His hands trembled as he activated the emitter, setting it to a low-power, short-range broadcast. The sound was inaudible to the human ear, but its emotional frequency began to radiate outwards in a tiny, 10-foot circle. Nothing happened for a moment. Then, a woman walking nearby with a stack of data slates faltered. Her smooth, efficient stride broke. She stopped, a look of profound confusion clouding her placid features. her head tilted as if trying to hear a forgotten song. A few feet away, a man who was handing a nutrient paste packet to his partner missed, the packet falling to the pristine ground. And then the unthinkable happened. The man's face, for a fraction of a second, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated irritation. "Clumsy," he muttered, the word a harsh, jagged stone thrown into the silent pool of the plaza. His partner flinched, not in fear, but in surprise, a flicker of hurt in her eyes. The moment passed as quickly as it came. The confluence's field, like an immune system, rushed in and smoothed the anomaly. The man's face went placid again. He picked up the packet with a polite, meaningless apology. The woman shook her head as if clearing a fog and continued on her way. But Eris had seen it. He had seen the crack in the mirror. He had seen the ghost in the machine. He had made them feel. He quickly shut off the device, his heart a wild drum against his ribs. The placid contentment of the plaza now seemed impossibly fragile, a thin veneer of ice over a raging ocean. He had the key. He couldn't fight the confluence with weapons or armies. Earth had none anymore. He had to fight them with memory. He had to remind humanity of the glorious, painful chaos of what it meant to be alive. He returned to the echo chamber not as a curator, but as a soldier. The weight of his discovery was crushing. He was alone, a single man against a silent, benevolent God who had stolen the world by convincing it that peace was worth any price. Looking at the rows of humming servers, at the cataloged emotions of a dead species, he knew his task was not just preservation anymore. It was necromancy. He was about to broadcast the ghosts of humanity's past, to scream into the silence with the voices of the dead, hoping, praying, that someone out there was still capable of listening. The initial euphoria of his success quickly curdled into a cold, pragmatic fear. Eris replayed the plaza incident 100 times, analyzing the data logs from his emitter. The emotional spike in the subjects was undeniable, a sharp, jagged peak of irritation and surprise in a flat sea of tranquility. But just as prominent was the response from the confluence's field, a massive, immediate wave of psychic energy that descended on the anomaly and snuffed it out like a thumb on a candle flame. It was an autoimmune response, swift and overwhelming. He had pricked the beast Viomitia, and the beast had noticed. A localized broadcast was a novelty, a party trick. To truly wake the world, he needed an amplifier. He needed to turn his whisper into a roar that could rattle the foundations of their gilded cage. His mind raced through schematics of pre-tranquility infrastructure, searching for a ghost of the old world's nervous system. He found it in the skeletal remains of the global satellite array, a relic of a noisier age, now repurposed by the confluence to regulate atmospheric moisture with placid efficiency. If he could find a way to hijack one of its central uplinks, he could potentially piggyback his emotional frequencies onto the planetary network. The primary hub was a fortress of serenity, located in what was once the Mojave Desert. But there were smaller, less monitored substations scattered across the continents. One, designated Substation 7, was located just 300 kilometers from his city, deep within the automated agricultural sector. It was a long shot, a desperate, insane plan that would require him to leave his shielded sanctuary for the first time in over a year. Before he could even begin to formulate a plan of infiltration, he needed to know if he was truly alone. Were there other glitches, other minds that chafed against the enforced peace? To search for them was to risk exposing himself, but to act alone was to guarantee failure. He spent the next 3 days writing a search algorithm, a digital divining rod designed not to find data, but to find its absence. He told it to hunt for statistical impossibilities within the city's network pockets of inefficiency, moments of unpredictable energy consumption, data transfers that deviated from the confluence's flawless logic. He masked his search queries within simulated archives of ancient, chaotic code, the digital equivalent of hiding a spy in a Mardi Gras parade. He was looking for the signature of a soul, a flicker of human messiness in the heart of the perfect machine. His algorithm crawled through the city's data streams for 72 hours, finding nothing but relentless, soul-crushing order. He was about to give up when a single, persistent flag appeared. It wasn't a dramatic error, but a subtle, recurring tremor in the city's energy grid, originating from the Network Harmonization Department. The anomaly was a micro-fluctuation, a tiny rhythmic hiccup in the power distribution logs that occurred at irregular intervals. To the Confluence's diagnostic systems, it was meaningless, statistically insignificant noise. But to Eris, it looked like a heartbeat. Lena's official title was Sub-Network Harmonizer, Grade 4. Her job was to stare at waterfalls of data, identifying and smoothing out any disruptions in the flow of energy and information throughout the city sector. For the past year, her work had been a form of meditation, a serene exercise in maintaining a perfect and unwavering equilibrium. But lately, she had found her attention snagged by Sector Gamma 9, the old financial district. The data flow there was wrong. It was 99.9% efficient, yet it felt discordant to her, like a single off-key instrument in a flawless orchestra. She had reported the harmonic dissonance 3 times, and 3 times the system had replied with the same placidly reassuring message: fluctuations within acceptable parameters. No action required. Yet she couldn't let it go. She found herself pulling up Gamma 9's logs in her spare moments, tracing the patterns. They weren't random. They felt deliberate, almost playful. Little loops of code that did nothing but chase their own tails. Tiny bursts of energy that mimicked the rhythm of a forgotten jazz solo she'd once seen in a historical file. It was inefficient. It was illogical. And for reasons she couldn't articulate. It felt more real than anything else in her perfectly managed life. She had begun to protect it, subtly altering her reports to divert diagnostic drones away from the sector, hiding her strange, beautiful noise within the system's blind spots. The knock on Eris's door was so gentle it was almost imperceptible. It was not the crisp rap of a delivery drone or the electronic chime of a scheduled visit. It was the soft, organic sound of knuckles on composite wood. Eris froze, the blood draining from his face. His external sensors hadn't registered anyone approaching. He looked at the monitor displaying the hallway feed. Standing there was a man in the simple gray tunic of a civic wellness counselor, or as the pre-tranquility remnants called them, a shepherd. The man's face was a mask of beatific calm, but his eyes, deep and placid, seemed to see through the door, through the walls, and into the frantic, terrified heart of Eris himself. He couldn't refuse to open it. That was an act of non-compliance, an emotional response. He took a deep, shuddering breath, reached into his own mental archive, and pulled up a memory he kept for emergencies: the deep, thoughtless trance of a Zen master during a 10-day silent retreat. He wrapped the feeling around his consciousness like a shroud and opened the door. "Greetings," the shepherd said, his voice a soothing balm. "I am Shepherd Theron. Your sector's wellness metrics indicated a minor deviation in your registered biorhythms. Just a routine check to ensure your continued contentment." Eris met his gaze, projecting the empty calm of the Zen monk. "I am content. Thank you for your concern." Shepherd Theron smiled. a gentle, unnerving expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course you are. May I come in for a moment?" Sometimes the architecture of these older units can create subtle dissonances. The shepherd stepped inside, his presence seeming to absorb the very sound in the room. He walked slowly, trailing his fingers along the wall, his head tilted. Eris felt a faint psychic pressure, a gentle, probing tendril searching for any flicker of anxiety, of deception, of fear. Eris held fast to his borrowed tranquility, his mind a silent, empty temple. The shepherd paused, his gaze falling on the sealed door to the stairwell that led down to the echo chamber. "Structural reinforcements?" he asked, his voice still impossibly soft. "For acoustic dampening," Eris replied, his own voice sounding distant, disconnected. "I find the residual hum of the city's systems can be distracting to my archival work." The shepherd nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on the door for a moment too long. The psychic pressure intensified, and for a terrifying second, Eris felt the memory of the Mardi Gras simulation, of Chloe's wild laughter, threatened to break through his defenses. He fought it down, forcing the image of a single valiant drop of water falling into a still pond to the forefront of his mind. Finally, the shepherd turned away. "Very well," he said, the smile returning. "It seems your contentment is stable. Maintain your harmony. Citizen Thorn." He glided out of the apartment as silently as he had arrived. Eris sealed the door and collapsed against it, his body racked with tremors, the Zen master's calm shattering into a million pieces. The confluence knew. It might not know what he was, or what he was doing, but it knew something was wrong. His time was running out. The encounter with the shepherd galvanized him. He abandoned all other projects and focused entirely on the anomaly in the network harmonization department. This was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was a race for an ally. He couldn't risk a direct message, and a broad emotional broadcast was too dangerous. He needed a lockpick, not a sledgehammer. He searched his archives for a very specific frequency, a complex emotional state that was neither aggressive nor chaotic, but that would be utterly alien to the confluence's placid world. He found it in a memory fragment from a pre-tranquility astrophysicist, a woman who had spent 30 years of her life hunting for a single, theoretical particle. The memory wasn't of her success, but of the moment just before, a nexus of profound, obsessive curiosity, of the maddening, exhilarating feeling of being on the absolute precipice of a revelation. It was the pure distilled essence of the need to know. He calibrated his portable emitter, converting the memory into a tight beam, low-intensity psychic signal. I bypassed his building's internal network, routing the signal through a series of abandoned copper wire conduits, forgotten relic of a bygone internet. It took 6 hours to snake his signal across the city, but finally, he had a lock on the terminal where the rhythmic data tremors originated. He took a deep breath, the name of the astrophysicist, Dr. Anya Sharma, echoing in his mind. He aimed his strange new weapon and fired. Lena was massaging her temples, the endless, serene data falls on her screen, giving her a headache she couldn't quite define. The anomaly in Gamma 9 was still there, a soft, rhythmic pulse. That was her secret. She was tracing its path when a new feeling washed over her, sharp and electrifying. It was utterly unlike the blanket peace of the tranquility. This was a focused, almost painful yearning, a desperate need for an answer to a question she hadn't yet formed. Her breath hitched. The feeling wasn't hers, but it resonated with the secret curiosity she had been harboring for months. It felt like a key turning in a lock deep inside her mind. As the strange, wonderful sensation crested, the data stream from Gamma 9 on her screen flickered and changed. The soft, rhythmic pulse, her little ghost in the machine, suddenly began to self-organize. The random-looking loops of code snapped into formation, the bursts of energy aligning into a coherent pattern. It was a pattern she had never seen on her harmonizer console, but one she recognized instantly from the historical archives. Simple, elegant, and, in this silent world, deafeningly loud. It was a single, stark symbol composed of light and data. It was a question mark. Lena stared, her placid mask finally cracking, her heart pounding with a forgotten, frantic rhythm. The hum of the terminal, the gentle glow of the screen, the entire serene artifice of her world seemed to fall away, leaving only that symbol and the terrifying, exhilarating realization it represented. She was not alone. The question mark on Lena's screen was more than a symbol. It was a schism. For a timeless moment, she was caught between two worlds. The first was the world of the tranquility, a place of soft edges and serene purpose, where a symbol like that was a logical error, a piece of corrupted data to be isolated and cleansed. The second was the world the symbol promised, a world of questions, of unknowns, of the jagged, terrifying thrill of discovery, the feeling of pure, unadulterated curiosity that had been beamed into her mind was still echoing through her, a resonant frequency that made the placid hum of the confluence feel thin and dissonant. She looked around the harmonization chamber. Dozens of her colleagues sat at identical terminals, their faces bathed in the same cool light, their expressions identical masks of mild contentment. None of them had noticed. The signal had been a psychic bullet, aimed at her alone. Her fingers, which a moment ago had moved with the fluid, thoughtless efficiency of a machine, now trembled just above her console. To respond was to declare herself an apostate. To ignore it was to let the only real thing she had felt in years wither and die. She chose heresy. Her hands moved with a newfound urgency, her mind racing ahead of the placid protocols she was supposed to follow. She couldn't send a direct reply. The system's monitoring algorithms would flag it instantly. She needed to speak the same language as the anomaly, the language of noise and inefficiency. She dove back into the logs of Sector Gamma 9, isolating the rhythmic data pulse she had secretly protected for so long. Using it as a carrier wave, she began to modulate it, not with code, but with memory. She didn't have a library of human history like Eris, but she had her own small, defiant collection of pre-tranquility art files, things she'd archived under the guise of historical data analysis. She selected a piece by a 20th century composer, a frantic, chaotic piano composition full of jarring chords and impossible rhythms, a piece called Gaspard de la Nuit. She translated the musical notation into a sequence of microbursts of energy and embedded it into the Gamma 9 data stream. It was a message of pure, defiant chaos, an answer to his question mark composed entirely of artistic rebellion. In his chamber, Eris watched the response unfold on his diagnostic panel. The steady, rhythmic heartbeat he had been tracking suddenly erupted into a feverish, syncopated arrhythmia. It was wild, unstructured, and utterly brilliant. His system translated the energy fluctuations back into their source data, and the frantic, beautiful notes of the piano piece filled his sanctum. He almost laughed aloud, a raw, explosive sound he had to physically stifle. It was more than a confirmation. It was a kindred spirit. He had sent a question, and she had answered with a declaration. They were both listening to the ghosts. His elation was cut short by a new alert. Shepard Theron was back. Not at his door this time, but on his official civic comms channel. The shepherd's face, a placid mask of benevolence, filled the screen. "Citizen Thorne," he began, his voice smooth as polished glass. "A citywide diagnostic has been scheduled for tomorrow at 0900 hours. It is a new deep field scan designed to optimize psychic harmony across all sectors. All citizens are required to be in their designated residences and to maintain a state of receptive tranquility. It is for your continued wellness." Eris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. A deep field scan, it's in. There was no ambiguity in the term. The confluence was moving from passive monitoring to an active purge. It would be a psychic wave, far more powerful than the constant background hum, designed to seek out and flatten any mind that harbored a discordant thought, any soul that resonated with the memory of chaos. It was an extinction-level event for individuality. He and his newfound ally would be the primary targets. They had less than 24 hours. He had to meet her. He had to get them both to Substation 7 before the wave hit. He sent another tight beam signal to Lena's terminal, this one stripped of all emotional subtlety. It was a simple data packet, a set of coordinates for a derelict service junction in the city's underlevels, and a time. Precisely 2 hours from now, he added a single, archaic word, a fragment from a pre-tranquility poem he had archived. Hurry. Lena received the coordinates like a jolt of electricity. The shepherd's announcement had been broadcast across the entire department. She understood its implications instantly. The beautiful, secret noise she had been nurturing was now a death sentence. Panic, a cold and unfamiliar sensation, began to bloom in her chest. She fought it down, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't just walk out. Her absence would be logged within minutes. She needed a cover, a logical reason to be in the city's underlevels. She initiated a diagnostic on a series of fiber optic conduits in the designated sector, then deliberately corrupted the data packet she sent to the maintenance network, creating a phantom system failure that required immediate, on-site manual inspection. It was a small act of sabotage, a lie told to a machine, and it felt like the most significant decision of her life. She grabbed a technician's toolkit, her movements now crisp and deliberate, and walked out of the harmonization chamber, nodding placidly to her colleagues, a calm and competent harmonizer going to fix a broken wire. But beneath the surface, her mind was screaming with the frantic, defiant notes of Gaspard de la Nuit. The underlevels were a forgotten world. Here, the city's pristine white aesthetic gave way to the raw, functional gray of exposed conduits and humming transformers. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and dust, a stark contrast to the filtered, scentless air of the world above. Eris was there first, his senses on high alert. He had brought his portable emitter, recalibrated to broadcast a short-range bubble of psychic static, a localized area of emotional noise designed to confuse any passive sensors or patrol drones. He had loaded it with a memory of a crowded marketplace in Marrakesh, a cacophony of haggling voices, bleeding goats, and fragrant spices. It was a small, desperate shield against the all-seeing eye of the confluence. He saw her approach, a lone figure moving with a purpose that was jarringly out of place in this placid world. She was younger than he'd expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes that were currently wide with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. They met in the shadow of a massive, silent ventilation fan, two ghosts in the machine. "You're the question mark," she said, her voice a little breathless. It was the first time in years Eris had heard a human voice that wasn't perfectly modulated, that held the subtle tremor of real emotion. "And you're the symphony of chaos," he replied, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "My name is Eris." "Lena." They stood for a moment in charged silence, the enormity of their situation hanging between them. "The scan," she said finally. "It's a purge." "I know," Eris confirmed. "They felt us. They're sterilizing the system, which is why we can't be here when it happens. I have a plan, but it's ambitious." He laid it out for her quickly, his voice low and urgent. "Substation 7, the global satellite network." Using his archive of memories not just to disrupt the tranquility, but to broadcast the full, chaotic, painful, and beautiful spectrum of human experience to the entire planet at once. It wasn't just about jamming their signal, it was about replacing it with their own. He wanted to give humanity its soul back, whether it wanted it or not. Lena listened, her initial fear giving way to a dawning sense of awe. The sheer, audacious scale of his plan was terrifying, but it was also the only logical path forward. "How do we get there?" she asked. "The agricultural sector is a restricted zone. We don't use the official transport tubes," Eris said, gesturing down a dark, narrow service tunnel. "We use the old ways." The tunnel led to the city's original, pre-tranquility subway system, a network of decaying tubes and silent stations that had been sealed off and forgotten. Getting a train to work would require bypassing decades of disuse and redirecting power from the grid above, a task that would be impossible for him alone. But for a sub-network harmonizer who knew the city's energy grid like the back of her own hand, it was merely a complex problem to be solved. For the next hour, they worked in frantic, focused synergy. Lena, patched into the grid with a portable interface from her toolkit, began the delicate and highly illegal process of rerouting terawatts of power, creating micro-blackouts in distant, automated sectors to mask the massive energy draw she needed. Eris, using his knowledge of pre-tranquility mechanics, worked on the train itself, coaxing its ancient magnetic drivers back to life. It was a strange partnership, the historian of feeling and the master of the energy grid, the poet and the engineer, both fighting for the same cause. Finally, with a groan of protesting metal, the train's internal lights flickered on. A soft, automated voice, a relic from a forgotten era, echoed through the empty station. "Next stop, Sector 9, mind the gap." As they climbed aboard the dusty, silent carriage, a new series of alerts began to cascade across Lena's interface. Her sabotage at the harmonization department had been discovered. Her energy rerouting had been noticed. Her unscheduled absence had been flagged. The system was no longer just suspicious, it was actively hunting them. Drones were being diverted to the underlevels. Shepherds were being mobilized. "They're coming," she said, her voice tight. "Eris, they know where we are." Eris looked from her panicked face to the dark tunnel ahead. "Then we'd better be fast," he said, slamming his hand down on the train's activation panel. With a lurch and a deafening screech of metal on metal, the ghost train shot forward, plunging them into the darkness, a desperate, two-person rebellion racing against the dawn of a silent, perfect world. The journey through the forgotten veins of the city was a disorienting, high-speed haunting. Emergency lights, powered by the train's stolen energy, flickered intermittently, illuminating decades of dust and decay in stroboscopic flashes. Stations, frozen in time, rushed past their window-silent platforms with faded advertisements for products no one remembered, skeletal remains of ticket booths, and the occasional, ghostly graffiti tag, a final, defiant scream from a world that had valued self-expression. Lena's focus was absolute, her fingers flying across her portable interface as she played a high-stakes shell game with the city's power grid. She was a digital phantom, creating false energy surges in industrial sectors to draw the system's attention while simultaneously feeding their maglev train the immense power it needed. It was like trying to conduct a symphony in the middle of an earthquake. "They've sealed the main tunnels ahead," she reported, her eyes not leaving the screen. "They're trying to box us in. I'm rerouting us through the old aqueduct lines, but the clearances are minimal." Eris gripped a handrail as the train took a sharp, unbanked turn, the screech of metal threatening to tear the carriage apart. He could feel the confluence's attention on them now, a palpable, psychic pressure that was no longer gentle or probing, but cold and constricting, like the coils of a great serpent. His role had shifted from mechanic to guardian. He sat in the center of the carriage, his portable emitter glowing softly on the floor in front of him. He was no longer broadcasting the chaotic noise of a marketplace. He was cycling through his most potent and volatile archives, turning their small carriage into a psychic storm. He broadcast the raw, unfiltered terror of a soldier pinned down by machine gun fire, followed immediately by the incandescent, world-altering love of a mother holding her newborn for the first time. He unleashed the agonizing grief of a composer who had just gone deaf. Then the savage, triumphant euphoria of an athlete breaking a world record. It was a barrage of emotional shrapnel, a chaotic, contradictory psychic scream designed to do one thing: hurt the thing that was hunting them. On Lena's screen, nested in the corner of her energy schematics, a small diagnostic window showed the status of the pursuit drones. Their efficiency ratings, normally a perfect 100%, began to fluctuate wildly. One drone, following them through a parallel tunnel, suddenly veered off course and slammed into a wall. Another simply powered down, its logic circuits fried by the sheer paradoxical nature of the emotions Eris was projecting. They were fighting a god, but they had discovered that even a god could get a migraine. The psychic toll on Eris was immense. He wasn't just playing back memories, he was living them, a dozen different lifetimes a minute. The sensory whiplash was nauseating. His nose began to bleed, a thin trickle of crimson that dripped onto the dusty floor. His body trembled with the phantom adrenaline of a dozen different lives, his mind a battlefield of conflicting joys and sorrows. Lena, despite her intense focus on the grid, saw his distress. "Eris, you have to stop. It's killing you," she yelled over the roar of the train. "It's a choice," he gasped, his eyes squeezed shut as he lived through the final, defiant thoughts of a philosopher accepting a death sentence, a perfect and silent death, or a messy, loud life. "I'm choosing loud." Their desperate flight came to an abrupt end as they burst from the tunnel into the cavernous space of a derelict water treatment facility on the edge of the automated farmlands. The track ahead was gone, collapsed into a chasm of rust and rubble. Lena cut the power, and the train slid to a halt just feet from the precipice, treatise, its ancient brakes screaming in protest. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by their ragged breathing and the slow, rhythmic drip of water from a corroded pipe. "They knew we were coming here," Lena whispered, her face pale in the dim light. "They sacrificed the main tunnel to force us into this dead end." A soft, melodic chime echoed through the cavern. On the far side of the chasm, a series of floodlights blinked on, bathing the area in a sterile white glow. A dozen civic wellness drones descended from openings in the ceiling, their movements fluid and perfectly synchronized. And between them, standing on a service platform, was Shepard Theron. He wasn't wearing his simple gray tunic anymore. He was clad in a form-fitting silver suit that seemed to ripple and shift, and his eyes, no longer placidly calm, glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. He was no longer pretending to be human. He was an avatar of the confluence. Your efforts are inefficient. Eris Thorn. The shepherd's voice boomed, though his mouth didn't move. The sound was both everywhere and nowhere at once. A direct psychic broadcast. You have taken the raw, chaotic data of your species' painful history and weaponized it. It is an impressive, if primitive, application of your limitations. Our limitations are our strengths. Eris shot back, climbing unsteadily to his feet. He reactivated his emitter, but this time he focused on a single, powerful memory, the righteous, unbending indignation of a civil rights leader facing down a wall of armed police. You offer peace, but it's the peace of the grave. The shepherd tilted his head, a gesture of almost scientific curiosity. The grave is a place of perfect equilibrium. Your species has been in a state of self-terminating chaos for millennia. We have merely edited the final chapter. We have given you a paradise your own nature would have forever denied you. You didn't give us paradise, Lena said, her voice ringing with newfound strength as she stood beside Eris. You stole our ability to choose it. You took the pain, but you took the joy with it. You flattened the mountains, but you filled in the valleys. All you've left is a perfect, featureless plain. Shepherd Theron's silver form rippled. For the first time, a flicker of something other than calm emanated from him. It was a cold, ancient weariness, the exhaustion of a being that had performed the same act on 1,000 worlds. Choice is the engine of suffering, he broadcast. We are its resolution. The deep field scan will correct this. Regression. It will begin in 90 seconds. Your rebellion is over. Eris looked at Lena. In her eyes, he didn't see fear, but a reflection of his own desperate resolve. He had one last memory, one final, desperate gamble. It was the most dangerous file in his archive, a recording he had never dared to fully experience himself. He had labeled it simply ego, pure. It was a composite memory, woven together from the minds of the most ambitious and egomaniacal figures in human history, a Roman emperor declaring himself a god, a physicist convinced he alone understood the mind of his creator, an artist so consumed by her own vision that she would sacrifice anything and anyone to realize it. It was the pure, unadulterated, and terrifying power of the human will to impose itself upon reality. Lena, Eris said, his voice low and raspy, when I do this, it's going to create a psychic vacuum, the biggest noise I can make. Your systems. Will they register it? She understood immediately. The confluence will be completely focused on you. Its own diagnostic systems will be momentarily blinded by the sheer force of your whatever you're about to do. It would be like a flashbang grenade going off in its mind. Is it enough? He asked. Enough time for you to do what you need to do. Get me a connection to Substation 7's core systems. She replied, her fingers already a blur across her interface. I'll give you your amplifier. Eris turned back to face the shepherd. He took a deep breath, placed the neural interface to his temples, and for the final time, he hit enter. The world didn't just dissolve, it inverted. Eris was no longer Eris. He was a singularity of pure, white-hot ambition. He was Caesar. He was Napoleon. He was Oppenheimer. He was every human who had ever looked at the world and believed with every fiber of their being that they could bend it to their will. A tidal wave of pure, undiluted ego erupted from him. A psychic supernova. The shepherd's silver form recoiled, flickering violently. The drones around him spasmed. Their perfect synchronization shattered. The very air in the cavern seemed to thicken, charged with the raw, terrifying power of a single, defiant consciousness screaming into the void, "I am," while the confluence's avatar was reeling, its psychic attention wholly consumed by the unprecedented assault. Lena worked with a speed and clarity she never knew she possessed. The shepherd's own communication link, the one he was using to project his voice, was a direct conduit to the planetary network. While it was distracted, it had left the door wide open. With a few frantic keystrokes, she hijacked the connection, burrowing through the confluence's own network architecture. It was like drafting behind a hurricane. Screens of code and data flashed before her eyes, but she saw her path. A single, clear thread leading to the heart of Substation 7. She found the primary broadcast control and, with no time for subtlety, smashed through its firewalls. She didn't just open a channel, she slaved the entire global satellite array to a new input source, Eris's portable emitter. As the psychic feedback loop threatened to tear Eris's mind apart, he felt a new connection open, a vast, echoing emptiness waiting to be filled. Lena had done it. He was no longer shouting into a cavern. He had a direct line to the soul of every living person on the planet. With the last of his strength, he let go of the ego construct and opened the floodgates of his entire archive. He didn't just broadcast one memory, he broadcast them all. The terror and the elation, the anguish and the ecstasy, the love, the hate, the greed, the sacrifice, the art, the war, the birth, the death. 200,000 years of the messy, contradictory, glorious, and agonizing story of humanity beamed directly into the mind of every man, woman, and child on earth in a single, deafening, soul-shattering moment. The great tranquility broke. The awakening was not a gentle sunrise. It was a global electroshock. In a single, aimless moment, 7 billion minds, becalmed for years on a placid ocean of contentment, were struck by a psychic tsunami. For the first time in a generation, people felt, and they felt everything. A stockbroker in London, halfway through a placidly efficient transaction, suddenly staggered back from his desk, overwhelmed by the phantom agony of a soldier's wound from a forgotten war, his gasp turning into a sob of pure, uncomprehending grief. In a perfectly harvested field in the Ukraine, a farm technician dropped to her knees, her mind filled with the incandescent joy of a scientist's eureka moment, and began to laugh, a wild, uninhibited sound that cracked the oppressive silence. Husbands and wives looked at each other as if for the first time, the comfortable, sterile affection of the tranquility suddenly replaced by a chaotic flood of real, and complex, and often contradictory emotions, a flicker of old resentment, a surge of forgotten passion, a pang of deep, aching love. The world in unison gasped. Chaos returned to the human condition not as a trickle, but as a deluge. In the water treatment facility, the effect was apocalyptic. As the full force of humanity's collective memory blasted across the planet, the avatar of the confluence shattered. Shepard Theron's silver form convulsed, breaking apart not into pieces, but into a cloud of shimmering, dissonant light. The pure, ordered consciousness of the confluence could not compute the sheer, paradoxical volume of human experience. It was like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. The avatar let out a final, silent scream of pure static, a sound of perfect order being ripped apart by perfect chaos. And then it was gone. The pursuit drones, their hive mind severed, fell from the air like stones, crashing to the cavern floor in a clatter of inert metal. The floodlights flickered and died, plunging the cavern back into a dim, echoing twilight. Aris collapsed, the neural interface falling from his temples. He was an empty vessel, a library whose every book had been thrown open to the wind. Lena rushed to his side, cradling his head. He was breathing, but his eyes were unfocused, staring at something far beyond the dripping ceiling of the cavern. He had poured out his entire being, and there was almost nothing left. The hours and days that followed were a global fever dream. The Confluence's psychic field, its primary control mechanism, was not destroyed, but it was critically fractured. Its placid signal drowned out by the cacophony of 7 billion newly awakened souls. Humanity, after years of emotional sedation, was a patient waking from a long coma. Its spiritual muscles atrophied. The initial reactions were overwhelming and unpredictable. There were riots, not of anger, but of confusion. People wept openly in the streets, overcome by emotions they had no names for. Spontaneous festivals of music and dance erupted in some cities, while in others, a profound, collective melancholia settled in as people began to grapple with the years they had lost, the choices they hadn't made. The flawlessly efficient systems of the Tranquility began to break down. Without the Confluence's gentle guidance, supply chains faltered. Automated systems, faced with the unpredictable and illogical behavior of their human overseers, began to log catastrophic errors. The utopia, it turned out, was a fragile thing, held together by a silence that had now been irrevocably broken. Aris and Lena, emerging from the underlevels into this new, chaotic world, were not hailed as heroes. They were ghosts, architects of a beautiful and terrifying madness that no one understood. They found refuge in a disused library, the irony not lost on them. Lena, using her knowledge of the network, was able to secure a firewalled communication system and began to monitor the global fallout. "It's fracturing," she reported, her face grim as she scrolled through erratic news feeds and desperate civic messages. The old divisions are resurfacing. People are scared. They're looking for someone to blame, or someone to follow. They don't know how to live like this anymore. Aris, still weak, spent his time sifting through the echoes of his own broadcast. His mind was now permanently connected to the psychic static of the planet. He could feel the waves of fear washing over Asia, the bursts of creative fervor in South America, the deep, aching loneliness of a man in a silent apartment in Toronto. He was a living seismograph for the soul of the world. He felt the rise of new leaders, prophets who claimed to speak for the old rage, artists who painted with the new sorrow, and dangerous ideologues who promised a return to order, a new and more brutal kind of tranquility. Humanity was free, but it was also adrift in a storm of its own making. One evening, as a chaotic, beautiful, and imperfect sunset painted the sky outside their library window, Aris felt a new signal touch his mind. It was faint, coherent, and utterly alien. It was the Confluence. It wasn't broadcasting a signal of control, but one of profound, aching curiosity. Why, the thought echoed, not in words, but in a wave of pure, uncomprehending inquiry. Why choose this? Noise. Why choose pain? Aris knew it was not an attack. It was a genuine question from a being that had tried to save them from a disease it could never understand. He sat down, closed his eyes, and for the first time, he prepared a response not as an archivist or a soldier, but as a teacher. He didn't send a memory of war or triumph. He chose a small, simple, and exquisitely painful file. It was the memory of a father teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle. He sent the full experience, the scraped knees and the tears of frustration, the wobbling uncertainty. The father's patient, steadying hand, his encouraging words. And then he sent the climax, that one perfect transcendent moment when the father lets go, and for 3 glorious, terrifying seconds, the daughter is flying on her own, her face a perfect portrait of fear melting into pure, unadulterated joy. He sent the scraped knee and the joy, inextricably linked, 2 sides of the same beautiful coin. This is why, he projected back, his thought clear and calm. Without the fall, there is no flight. There was a long silence from the void, a pause that stretched for an hour, then a final, faint pulse of understanding washed over him, and then, for the first time in years, the psychic space around Earth felt truly empty. The confluence was gone. It had not been defeated. It had been educated. It had left, perhaps to ponder the beautiful, hurrible logic of a species that learned to fly by learning how to fall. The end was never about victory. It was about the restoration of a conversation. The world did not magically heal. Wishes were redrawn. Ideologies clashed, and humanity stumbled, relearning the difficult, messy art of living with itself. There was new pain, new conflict, new heartbreak, but there was also new art, new love, new discovery, and new laughter, louder and more precious than ever before. Eris and Lena never led a government or a movement. They became curators of the new world, their echo chamber no longer a secret rebellion, but a public trust, a place where people could come to remember the silence and to understand the noise. They archived the new memories being forged every day, ensuring that the full, chaotic spectrum of the human story would never again be forgotten. Years later, an old man, Eris sat with a young girl on a hill overlooking a city that was still rebuilding, still messy, still gloriously and imperfectly human. The girl, who had only ever known this loud, vibrant world, asked him what the tranquility had been like. Eris smiled, a faint, wistful expression. "Imagine," he said, "a world with no shadows." The girl frowned, looking at her own sharp shadow stretching out before her in the late afternoon sun. "But how would you know how bright the light was?" she asked. Iris looked out at the city, at the beautiful chaotic tapestry of light and shadow, and felt a joy so profound it was almost painful. "Exactly," he whispered. "Exactly."